All right, hold on to your horses. We will be live in just a minute here. Make sure you smash that like button when you get into the room. I hope you are all well today. All right, folks, welcome back to Pangburn. I hope you are all well, maximizing well-being for yourself and those around you. By now, you should know when I say well-being, I'm simply referring to physical, mental, and social health. That is my moral quest, by the way, to maximize well-being for myself and those around me. Those around me would include anyone who I affect, including this live stream. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about types of evidence, and we're going to be analyzing Matt Dillahunty's video that he just dropped that is titled Atheist Debates, Alex O'Connor and Joseph Schmid Shockingly Wrong on Claims, Evidence, and Science. So about 1 trillion people have sent this to me, probably because of my connection and the channel's connection with Matt Dillahunty and Alex O'Connor. They thought it would be a cool video for me to analyze, and we're going to go through it with a super fine-tooth comb. Thank you. I do love this hat, but my son, who is 14 months old, loves it even more. He steals it from me, puts it on his head, and runs around with it, even though he can't see when it's on his head. But it's very cute. Imagine a little tiny boy, who actually isn't that tiny compared to other boys his age, running around in just a diaper and this giant hat. My head is like a quadruple extra large hat size, so it's quite the sight. Okay. What are some different types of evidence? I notice to throw a little critique based on just my experience in the atheist community throughout my life, and of course I'm an atheist, I'm part of that community, that there can sometimes be a stringent idea of what constitutes evidence. Evidence is a very vast, deep topic in the philosophy of science and philosophy in general, and in science, of course. And yes, Moon Shoes, you are totally correct. Please don't neglect that like button. What I am doing here, I feel like we need much more high resolution analysis happening on the internet. So I'm throwing my hat in the ring to offer some of that. And there is not enough content holding other people's analysis accountable. And that's what I'm attempting to do here. And it's not for reasons of malice or for reasons of scoring political points, but for reasons of helping with the general education that's being offered on this platform on YouTube. And hopefully adding higher, allowing people to engage in higher order conceptualization and conceptual organization that we should always be striving for. We should always be striving to achieve higher order conceptual organization. That is what philosophy is. So let's first go through the different types of evidence from an academic perspective that exist as academic conceptualizations. So the core idea of evidence is anything that increases or decreases the probability that a claim is true. This is closely tied to the Bayesian reasoning view of knowledge. Evidence shifts degrees of belief. It doesn't give absolute certainty, of course. Certainty is almost certainly unattainable. That should be out of the game with regards to your epistemological framework. If you are in pursuit of certainty of anything, or you think you found it, just stop. You haven't. You are fallibilist at your very nature, even though there are some ideologies that are attempting to have you run away from that fallibilist nature, in that your nature of being open to update. That is a part of our nature, but there are bad ideas out there that try to tie you into dogmatism. Dogma meaning believing something to be incontrovertibly true, impossible that it could be incorrect. That is what dogma is. So do away with certainty. Another thing that we're probably going to touch on as we move through this video and as we talk about evidence, that possibility also ought not weigh into your epistemic standards within the realm of your epistemology. Plausibility is what matters. Plausibility, not possibility. Why should possibility not weigh into our epistemic standards? Well, I know that Michael Jackson is not moonwalking across the backside of the sun right now. I know that for reasons that should be obvious to you if you understand the basics of physics. Now, someone will say, yeah, but it's still possible that he is. And that is true. It is possible that Michael Jackson is moonwalking across the sun right now. If you think it's impossible, you are adopting an incredibly large burden of proof. To simply agree that it is possible is to say that you have no way of eliminating possibility. That's all that is. But to claim that you have scanned the entire realm of possibility, and simply because of where you are now, based on your epistemic standards, that you can eliminate such things that seem insane from a plausibility perspective, then you are making a grave mistake. So, types of evidence in science. Probably the most familiar with, for most people, would be empirical observational evidence. So based on, this is based on direct observation or measurement, does not necessarily involve manipulation. Examples, astronomical observations of galaxies, epidemiological data on disease spread, fossil records. The strength with empirical evidence is that it has real-world observable grounding. The weakness, there is often confusion when doing empiricism with correlation and causation. Correlation is, of course, not equal to causation. Experimental evidence comes from controlled experiments. Variables are manipulated to test causality. Example, randomized controlled trials, RCTs, in medicine. Lab experiments in physics or chemistry. The strength here is that this is the strongest method for establishing causal relationships. The weakness here can be artificial or limited in scope. Make sure you guys take a second to smash that like button. This is the kind of stuff I want to see more popular, to be more popular on YouTube, this kind of high resolution analysis work. And it takes time, so be sure you're practicing patience. Statistical evidence uses mathematical analysis of data, often supports or qualifies empirical and experimental findings. Examples: p-values, confidence intervals, regression models, meta-analyses. The strength here quantifies uncertainty, weakness, misuse, or misinterpretation is common. So I'm sure you all can come up with examples of where statistics are misused or misrepresented. I've noticed that in political discourse, this can be very common. If you're trying to score points for, say, clamping down on immigration, you might cherry pick something like, immigrants are 10 times more likely to kill a person by pushing a vending machine on top of them that results in them being squashed to death. And then people, I don't want to be squashed to death. But there's important information missing there. That may in fact be the case. Let's say if there was 6 vending machine deaths in the United States of America, and maybe 4 of those happen to be immigrants that caused them. Is that a relevant statistic when we're looking at the overall scope of immigration? So, there's a lot of irrationality that is, someone has a purpose. They're trying to achieve a goal, and they can cite and say maybe the goal is less immigration, and then they will cite some kind of misused statistic that can be demonstrated by good logical standards to be irrational to those purposes. Mechanistic evidence explains how or why something works. So examples: biological pathways, how a drug affects cells, physical laws explaining motion. The strength here: deep explanatory power. Weakness: can be incomplete or speculative. Replicability and converging evidence. Findings confirmed across multiple independent studies. Examples: same result reproduced in different labs. Multiple methods pointing to the same conclusion. The strength here is that this is a gold standard for reliability. When we confirm findings across multiple independent studies. The weakness here: the replication crisis show it's not always achieved. So there can be a phenomena, or there can something that happens in an experiment. Let's say, for example, something that is widely observed, documented. We have all the data at, let's say, CERN, at the Large Hadron Collider. And we have so many different methods of measuring phenomena of what's going on. And we have this very, very rare moment occur in the collider. And we document it, and we say, this actually demonstrates this particular phenomena that we predicted by ways of theoretical physics and mathematics. But they have a hard time, and let's say to this date, have never been able to replicate it. But we have amazing evidence and recordings and data, everything we would want to see, except we can't replicate it. So we shouldn't always assume we will necessarily be able to replicate something that is in fact the case. Some things may in fact be very difficult to replicate due to the very low probability of those things occurring. So let's go to, so that's 5 different types. Just a quick recap there. Empirical evidence, experimental evidence, statistical evidence, mechanistic evidence, replicability and converging evidence. And those are the 5 general types of evidence we would see in science. Now let's go to types of evidence in philosophy. Now, something to keep in mind is that science is philosophy, right? The scientific method, everything in science is born of a philosophical principle studied in the philosophy of science. A lot of people think that science and philosophy are separate, but no. I mean, philosophy, to put it in the most accurate terms, I think is engaging in conceptual organization. So what does that mean? We are conceptualizers. We're always engaging in conceptual organization. So just like even if a piano player is playing at the beginner lowest stages, lowest level, they're still a piano player at some level. We are all philosophers at some level. We're not all analytic philosophers. We're not all expert philosophers. We all wouldn't put the label of philosopher on us for in a pragmatic sense. But we all are doing philosophy if we are to agree that philosophy essentially is conceptual organization. And science is no different there. So it's important to consider types of evidence in philosophy. So philosophy deals less with experiments and more with reasoning structures. So logical evidence, deductive validity, based on valid logical structure. If A leads to B, then if we have A, we can deduce from that, therefore B. I hope that makes sense. So an example would be, if it is raining, the ground is wet. This is a conditional statement. If it is raining, the ground is wet. If A, then B. So A inferring B means if A is true, then B follows. So it's a reasonable inference that if you go outside and the ground is wet, it's a reasonable inference that it was raining. It does imply that it was raining. Now, not just in a single spot where there might be a hose present or a single puddle in the middle of very dry ground around it. But this is how, this is what logical evidence looks like. Deductive validity. Conceptual analysis. This is a kind of evidence in philosophy. So clarifies meaning of concepts. What is knowledge? What is justice? The strengths here prevents confusion and equivocation. Weakness can become overly abstract. Now, again, let's not confuse what we're reading here with what you would consider good evidence to demonstrate the existence of a new green spotted tree frog. That's not the purpose of this kind of evidence, right? Thought experiments, hypothetical scenarios to test intuitions, trolley problem, brain in a vat. The strengths here reveals hidden assumptions. Weakness, intuition dependent. Inference to the best explanation, abductive evidence. Choose the explanation that best accounts for the data, used in both science and philosophy. Examples, scientific theories explaining observations, arguments for realism versus anti-realism. Strengths, matches real reasoning practice. Weakness, Best can be subjective. Doesn't have to be, but can be purely subjective. Now, 10. From what I've heard from a lot of people sending me the video that we're going to look at today, which is Matt Dillahunty responding to some comments from Alex O'Connor and another individual. There's been a lot of people asking me, but what about testimonial evidence? Isn't testimonial evidence evidence? It is evidence, but it depends. The amount of validity or soundness it holds depends on the discipline. So again, testimonial evidence, this is based on what others report. Scientific papers, expert consensus, historical accounts, the strength necessary for large-scale knowledge. Weakness depends on credibility. So we all rely on testimonial evidence. We all can't be in the lab. But what about those scientists in the lab? They could be lying to us about the vaccines. We all rely on testimonial evidence. It is necessary for large-scale knowledge. You do need to, quote unquote, trust the science to a certain degree. So just quickly, some cross-domain distinctions here. Direct versus indirect evidence. Direct, seeing the phenomena itself. Indirect, inferring from effects. An example, seeing smoke. Indirect evidence of fire, right? You see a smoke cloud, that's indirect evidence of fire. Where there's smoke, there's often fire. Not really nowadays. A lot of people smoke. They might confuse smoke for vaporizer material. What is strong versus weak evidence? Determined by reliability, reproducibility, alternative explanations. Under determination. Multiple theories can explain the same evidence. A classic issue in philosophy of science, evidence alone may not uniquely determine truth. Okay. Here is a clean hierarchy. Well, I guess we actually don't have to go through that. We'll get into the... Yeah, exactly. That's a good example as well. Smoke can come from ignition, right? Or smoke can come from the back of a diesel truck. We can all come up with tons of examples of where there might not necessarily be what we would think is reasonable to call fire. Okay. So let's go through this video by Matt. I'm interested to dive into this. Okay, we just need to hide that. Okay, here we go.
The Atheist Debate Patreon Project presents Alex O'Connor on claims, evidence, and science. Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. So I guess kind of full disclosure, side introduction. I know Alex O'Connor a little bit. He did an episode of Atheist Experience with me years ago. We had mutual friends and interacted a bit. And then there was some sort of largely irrelevant falling out surrounding veganism. But in any case, I haven't heard from him in years, and it doesn't bother me. It's not like bad blood or anything. And he's sitting down to do a video with James Schmid, who I don't know and sorry, hadn't heard of prior to this. I don't spend a lot of time watching this content. I spent more time, kind of interacting with believers. And so I really don't know much about Joseph. I don't know what his beliefs are. I think he's working on a PhD in philosophy at Princeton, so drafts. But they're listing a bunch of like things atheists should stop saying. And I haven't watched it, but I'm sure there's plenty of them that I agree with them on. But at some point they mentioned me, and that caused people to send it to me. And I'm like, I don't engage in these sort of, ooh, let me go at Alex. Yeah. But here we go. It was asked for people to watch it. I have watched it, so this isn't my initial reaction.
You'll notice how Matt Dillahunty often maintains a strong fallibilist posture. In Pangburn philosophy, this is what I'm looking for all the time in thinkers. Are they speaking fallibilistically? Are they speaking in a way that is open to revision? Or are they posturing in a position of certitude with what they are saying? And are they, being a good faith, helpful communicator when we get into the communication standards at Pangburn? This is a very nice beginning posture for Matt Dillahunty from a fallibilist communication perspective, from a patient's perspective. Great stuff.
But we're going to watch it together, and I have thoughts on it because I have thoughts and I was asked. So here we go.
Okay. So relatively quick fire, right? Claims are not evidence. What does that mean? Where does it come from? Why is it on this list?
What does it mean? That's a good question.
It is a good question. And it would have been nice if maybe you could ask somebody who might know.
Slightly unclear what it means. I think it comes from Matt Dillahunty.
Matt Dillahunty, right?
Uh-oh. I'm the first person to suggest this. I think maybe that what they mean, probably listening charitably, is that I popularized some version of it. And to be fair, I don't know exactly which version I've probably used more often than not. But a shorthand, claims aren't evidence, probably isn't accurate. But my intent was always that the claim or a claim is not evidence of the truth of that proposition, which oddly enough, despite saying it wasn't clear, gets us to this.
I think so. I think that's like his biggest motto, like claims aren't evidence. And then, he like,
my biggest motto. No, I would say that my biggest motto is I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. So I don't really.
Matt Dillahunty is doing the correct thing here. He is responding to what is being said in the video. As I've been analyzing other reviewers and their content, they've missed that completely. They're trying to infer too much. They're trying to mind read too much out of the person they're analyzing in the video, and they start going down to really dumpster diving level of epistemological standards and the standards by which they analyze content. But Matt is doing the right thing, of course, on focusing what is being said in the video here.
We consider this a motto, but let's see what they say.
his biggest motto, like claims aren't evidence. And then, he like hangs up on the caller.
So a big question here, it seems, at least to begin with, is going to be, are claims evidence? This video that Matt's responding to says claims are not evidence. So we will be wrestling with what we can give as our best answer today to that question. But let's let this play out some more.
Or something. That's a nice way to end.
That's wild. Wow. Okay, so
let's go back to the claim here quickly by
despite
this
saying
guy,
it wasn't clear,
Joseph.
Gets us to this.
I think so. I think that's like his biggest motto, like claims aren't evidence, and then he like.
My biggest motto. No, I would say.
So we'll want to see if Joseph Schmid offers any kind of evidence as to why he believes or thinks this is Matt Dillahunty's biggest motto. And we will also want to see if Alex O'Connor pushes back to try to extract that from this guy, or is Alex O'Connor just going to nod along and agree? This is an important point. If someone makes a claim like this, you think that what is informing that thought? What are the justifications here? Can you lay that out for me? And then this person, Joseph, might say something like, well, based on the things I've seen from Matt Dillahunty, and then he should say like how much he watches Matt Dillahunty. It just seems like, and then we're going to probably recognize, if my prediction is correct here, that Joseph Schmid is maybe engaging with a bit of vibes-based epistemology here, which is not good, right? Vibes-based epistemology, that's Joe Rogan level epistemological standards, right? We want to transcend that. And when I say Joe Rogan level, let me clarify that I've done deep analyses of Joe Rogan in the past, large swaths of transcripts. I've done general analysis of Joe Rogan's thinking across time. So what's influencing that belief that Joe Rogan's like a vibes-based epistemic thinker is based on some study I've done and analysis I've done into, including thousands of hours of Joe Rogan speaking and thinking. So
say that my biggest motto is I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. So I don't really consider this a motto, but let's see what they say.
His biggest motto, like, claims aren't evidence, and then he like hangs up on the call or something. That's a nice way to end.
That's wild.
So it seems like there's some lighthearted. There's a air of lightheartedness between Alex O'Connor and Joseph Schmid here. They are, maybe this is meant to be more playful and not something that Joseph Schmid actually believes. But it is an oversimplification, overgeneralization of someone like Matt, who takes, hundreds, if not thousands of calls every year, however many calls he takes, how many of them have this kind of
claims
result?
Aren't evidence, and then he like hangs up on the call or something. That's a nice way to end.
That's wild. Wow. Okay, so they don't seem to know what claims aren't evidence means in that context, but they do seem to kind of know. But they think it's some motto that I use as like a thought-terminating cliche.
I very much appreciate it.
Going to reference. And then I hang up. I'd be surprised if anybody could find an example in the 20 years or any significant examples in the 20 years that I've done this, where I just said claims aren't evidence and then hung up on somebody.
Yeah, so Matt's calling for examples of this because these claims are being made. Even if this person is joking, they're kind of presenting this information as though they actually believe it or that this is like a regular occurrence. So yeah, fair enough for Matt to ask for evidence here.
That's a surprising kind of misrepresentation of what I do.
So in fact, what Joseph Schmid is, he's making a claim here, and there is no evidence accompanying it. And Alex O'Connor thus far has not called for anything, or mentioned that perhaps this is not fair, an overgeneralization for someone who has done a lot of work taking calls and speaking to people he disagrees with.
But that's all right. I'd really like to see an example of this ridiculous accusation, because I don't ever recall trying to shut down thought I don't ever recall trying to use this as a terminus and then hanging up on people. And I think it's a little, I mean, don't get me wrong, I hang up. But of the three of us, I'm the only one who I know is out in the trenches engaging with both honest and dishonest interlocutors on a regular basis, where I'm constantly in a position to explain complex topics in kind of simple terms. But that's all right.
So under critique, Matt Dillahunty is maintaining a strong fallibilist posture. He is honestly, his posture is honesty, sincerity of intentions, which is good faith. He's being very helpful in the way he's communicating and being very helpful in the way he's reacting to some pretty strong critiques of himself. Excellent posture from a Pangburnian perspective. When we consider fallibilism, good faith, helpful communication, he's maintaining a high level of patience. So ultimate patience, even in the face of ideas that you detest. This would be, a detestable idea, but low level, not like someone trying to argue that, to Matt, that say that like all trans people are immoral or something. That would be much higher detestable level to Matt Dillahunty than what's happening here, of course.
If they think all I do is hang up on it, maybe that explains why I haven't heard from Alex in so many years. But cool. Let's see what else is in the holier than thou.
So I think maybe a claim that approximates what people are trying to express.
Notice how Matt said, maybe that's why I haven't heard from Alex, but this is great. Again, I just have to point this out because this is what we want to see in thinkers. Fallibilist posture, open for update, speaking in ways of maybe this, I'm not sure. Even the body language of I know I could be wrong about this. That is very important. In what we want to see. If you're out there reviewing content, this is a great example of how you want to approach this, even if it's content that is attacking you.
Expressed with this slogan is the following. The mere fact that somebody claims that P does not provide evidence for P's truth.
Yeah. The mere claim, P.
Let's go back a second.
Let's see what else is in the holier than thou.
So I think maybe a claim that approximates what people are trying.
So Matt says, let's see what else is in the holier than thou. He is expressing, we haven't talked about lightheartedness yet, but there has been a lighthearted air over this video thus far. That's the posture I'm seeing from Matt Dillahunty. Little teasing like this in a lighthearted way, completely welcome and a great posture in intellectualism. It signals that Matt is playful and open to play with the content that's coming his way.
I do is hang up on it. Maybe that explains why I haven't heard from Alex in so many years. But cool. Let's see what else is in the holier than thou.
So I think maybe a claim that approximates what people are trying to express with this slogan is the following. The mere fact that somebody claims that P does not provide evidence for P's truth.
Yeah. The mere claim, P, does not in and of itself provide evidence that P is true. Cool. So...
Yeah, I agree with Matt here. That is the case. It'll be interesting where Joseph Schmid goes with this, and perhaps it might relate to, without the proposition, without the claim to begin with, any kind of following evidence would be just irrational or nothing compared to, if not compared to the proposition of the claim that is being made. But we'll see.
I appreciate the fact that despite him saying it wasn't clear, he got to what it means.
I think that's what they're getting at. Am I
Yeah, that's
wrong?
fair enough. And this comes up in the context of the resurrection, right?
No, Alex, it doesn't just see, this is so weird. Alex is going to be like, oh, this comes up in the context of the resurrection, and here's how he portrays it.
Right, because Matt will be debating.
Let's go back here.
No, Alex, it doesn't just see, this does not in and of itself provide evidence that P is true. Cool. So I appreciate the fact that despite him saying it wasn't clear, he got to what it means.
So Matt also brought up the, he's responding to or at least mentioning the concept of truth here. Truth is a deep and vast area of study in philosophy. I always suggest everyone study criteria of truth and different criterias of truth that you are engaging with in your own day-to-day. There are many people that want to believe that they are correspondence criteria carriers throughout their entire lives and through their day-to-day because they're a pro-science person and they care about evidence and things like this, but that's not the case. We are all engaging with all different kinds of criteria of truth in our day-to-day, like coherence. We are accepting things because accepting things as true because they seem coherent to us all the time. An example of, if your spouse comes home with what seems to be a grocery bag with some groceries in it, and they say, I've been to, or I was just at the grocery store. Now, a lot of you are going to simply accept that to be true, right? And some of you might say, well, I have good reason to accept that that's true because, I'm corresponding with the evidence before me, the evidence of my spouse having groceries with them, and also their testimony to me. But does that really mean, from a correspondence criteria perspective, that they actually did go to the grocery store? Not necessarily. So we are all engaging in coherence to some degree on many occasions. There will also be some, truth by traditions we still hold in our mind. Like, let's say if you heard from your grandfather when you were young and impressionable that your great-great-grandfather was someone who could chop a tree down in only 3 axe hits. A big tree, it only took 3 axe hits. He was like Paul Bunyan. That actually still might be a truth you are holding on to, even if you haven't reflected on it in some time, but you might have never questioned it and accepted it as true at some point in time and haven't really revised on that. This can be an instance of tradition as a criteria of truth. So, and of course, like traditions like religions and things like this, sometimes people will simply believe in the propositions coming from religions because it's traditional to do so, and that will be enough to inform the truth aspect of their epistemic standards. So.
I think that's what they're getting at. Am I
Yeah,
wrong?
that's fair enough. And this comes up in the context of the resurrection, right?
No, Alex, it doesn't just see, this is so weird. Alex is going to be like, oh, this comes up in the context of the
So Matt was about to make a mistake and say, no, Alex, this doesn't just come up in the but he stopped and corrected himself. That was, again, important evidence that Matt Dillahunty is open to update and listening carefully to what's going on. We will all make emotional knee-jerk mistakes when responding to content, but the key is there repair? Is there update? Is there ability to stop, go back, and change. This is an important moment to look at.
That's fair enough. And this comes up in the context of the resurrection, right?
No, Alex, it doesn't just see, this is so weird. Alex is going to be like, oh, this comes up in the...
You can almost see where Matt like recalibrates there. It's fascinating. And this is a sign of someone who wants to get this right. Doesn't want to straw man Alex O'Connor in this situation.
Oh, Alex, it doesn't just see, this is so weird. Alex is going to be like, oh, this comes up in the context of the resurrection. And here's how he portrays it.
Because Matt will be debating a Christian and they'll say, look, there are all of these people who claimed to see Jesus after he died. And Matt will say, claims are not evidence. I need evidence that Jesus rose from the dead.
Yeah. So in my view, this...
So we talked about, remember, we talked about testimonial evidence. So testimonial evidence will be used in like courts of law, right? So testimonial evidence is something that we do take very seriously in society even today. It's taken seriously with regards to how you discern and come to believe large-scale bodies of knowledge. You are relying on testimonial evidence from hopefully reputable sources. So it'll be interesting to see how Matt Dillahunty responds to this.
This is just clearly false. I mean, like, very often the fact that someone claims that P is evidence for the truth of P.
No, it's not. And welcome. I would hang up on you right now, evidently, in your fictional little world. So no, this isn't just about the resurrection. Nothing that I do or say.
Okay, so Matt's patience is waning a bit here. Let's go back.
And welcome. I would hang up on you right now, evidently, in your fictional little world. So no.
He's still in that zone of passionate, lighthearted play. It's getting a bit sharper, but let's hear his response.
This isn't just about the resurrection. Nothing that I do or say has anything.
Ooh, let's go back.
Of P.
No, it's not. And welcome. I would hang up on you right now, evidently, in your fictional little world. So no, this isn't just about the resurrection.
So nobody said this is just about the resurrection. So unfortunately, Matt retracted back to that initial, what seemed to be an emotional knee-jerk reaction that was corrected. But the just here is an incorrect representation of what was said.
Claims that P is evidence for the truth of P.
No, it's not. And welcome. I would hang up on you right now, evidently, in your fictional little world. So no, this isn't just about the resurrection. Nothing that I do or say has anything. No broad thing about claims aren't evidence is just about the resurrection. Does it come up in the context of discussions about the resurrection? Sure, it comes up in the context of any claim. If somebody makes a claim that P is true, that in and of itself is not evidence for the proposition that P is true.
So yeah, the just part, if Matt's responding to, no, it's not just about the resurrection, this would be a straw man like response. But I hope you guys see the difference between if someone says, offers an example, like, it's like when, it comes up when he's talking about the resurrection. That is not to say that, this is just about Matt Dillahunty's, hate for Christianity or like that these testimonials relate to this resurrection, which Matt already believes isn't true. Like we would want to stay out of that zone and respond directly to the language, the precise language that is being used.
It is in fact that simple. He nailed it. But he thinks the mere fact that someone professes that P is true is evidence that P is true. So set aside Alex kind of shifting focus to the resurrection. What I'm talking about, epistemology and skepticism, such that doesn't matter what the claim is. The claim itself is not in any way evidence for the claim being true? I'm going to let James continue.
So the question is the evidence in any way, or is the claim in any way evidence of the proposition being true? Well, it depends. We can use the court example again. Is a court going to use personal testimony from someone, let's say, who a murderer was trying to kill? Let's say a serial killer was trying to kill their next victim, and that victim happened to survive. How strong is that testimony going to be to judges and juries? How much will that weigh into the body of evidence, if we're going to call it that, to demonstrate that, in fact, this person did try to kill the defendant, or the victim here. So yeah, it seems like we are really talking about testimonial evidence and the weight of it, whether it's good evidence, bad evidence, or whether it is evidence at all. So let's go back a bit here.
Is that P is true is evidence that P is true.
Sorry,
Just about the resurrection. Does it come up in the context of discussions about the resurrection? Sure, it comes up in the context of any claim. If somebody makes a claim that P is true, that in and of itself is not evidence for the proposition that P is true.
So if someone makes a claim that it is true that this person tried to murder me, we're talking just the claim itself. If we're talking just the claim itself, absent any other context, it is true that just the claim itself is not evidence. But claims come with context, right? If the claim maker is the person at this point who is allegedly the serial killer attempted murder on them, that's a different consideration. So I think we might have these, Joseph Schmid and Alex and Matt Dillahunty engaging on two different levels of abstraction here, which is very interesting.
It is, in fact, that simple. He nailed it. But he thinks the mere fact that someone professes that P is true is evidence that P is true. So set aside Alex.
So it might in fact be claim dependent, right? It depends on the claim and proposition. If the claim includes, I was at the scene of the crime and the defendant was trying to stab me and I fought them off, and that is why they committed the crime of attempted murder. Do we think that in total, and there's a bunch of propositions pushed together there, but do we think that in total would qualify as evidence, even though it's just testimony? I think that example would qualify as evidence. But it depends what's being claimed. One thing we do have to keep in mind, that testimony evidence, well, first of all, this is a question for the chat. do you think testimony evidence is actually evidence? Do you think testimony should be considered evidence? If you disagree with this, then you disagree with this academic categorization. But I'm interested with chat. Let me know. Let me know in the chat section here if you consider testimony to be evidence. Please let me know, and I'll read through some of your responses. I'm just quickly going to fill up my water. Someone said already testimony is weak evidence. So I'm not asking that question. We're not asking that question. Please answer whether you think it's evidence or not. I'm not asking whether you think it's weak or strong evidence. I'm asking you if it's evidence at all. Let me just fill up my water, and hopefully you guys can drop some responses. Okay, I brought a jug of water. Okay, let's see. Yeah, someone says yes, testimonials are evidence, but they're not necessarily good evidence. A lot of people saying not good evidence. A lot of people saying weak evidence. Let's see. It is the worst evidence, someone says, but yes, it's evidence. Darren says testimony is not evidence. So if you're going to say testimony is not evidence, please let us know why you think that. Let us know your justifications. That's part of being a rigorous thinker and articulator of what you think. And then you say, and yes, I disagree with your academic classification. Well, it's not my academic classification. This is a classification of evidence in academia. And someone says, and then they go on to say, it's why you don't go to philosophy to distinguish fact from fiction. You go to science. Science is philosophy. So the philosophy of science is where science, the kind of science you are referencing, like in practice, the scientific method, that stems from philosophy and also is philosophy. So the philosophy of science is the first order principle with regard to what science is. So Robin saying alone it is not sufficient. But Robin, did you say whether you think it's evidence or not? You're saying alone it is not sufficient to accept a claim. Fair enough. That's not the question. The question is whether or not it is evidence. But you said it's not good evidence. Okay, so that I can infer from that you're saying it's bad evidence. Okay, fine. Neil says it isn't evidence in terms of logical reasoning, but informally we can call it evidence in a trial, for example. Okay, so you agree it's evidence. Someone says testimonials may be evidence, but considered weak or false depending on stronger evidence. Yeah, of course. That's very good. Very good answer by Aosine 911. Someone said extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. No, you should stop saying that. That's a bad meme. It's just incorrect. It could be ordinary evidence that demonstrates an extraordinary claim. It's just a bad meme. People should stop saying that. It's like you're sitting there and like some by someone's standards they might say that Bigfoot existing would be extraordinary, right? And then someone brings definitive, let's say someone brings the same kind of empirical proof that you would need to demonstrate the existence of a new green spotted tree frog. And then someone sits there with their arms crossed and says, no, I was expecting extraordinary evidence for Bigfoot because it's an extraordinary claim. Everyone should stop saying that. It's not even a good shorthand heuristic. It's a bad claim. People are confusing testimony with claims. No, testimony are claims. Do you think there's a difference between testimony and claims? Let's look at that. So apart from like a language distinction, right? Like a taxonomic category distinction. Let's look here. So all testimonies involve claims, but not all claims are testimony. Yeah, that is true. If that's what you were getting at, commenter, then totally agree. Again, one more time, all testimony involves claims, but not all claims are testimony. Someone says really depends on the context. Testimony can be super strong. Yeah. I mean, philosopher Thomas Panter and I were talking last night about context just as a concept, and everything really within the purview of our experience is context dependent. It seems very difficult to even imagine things that are not context dependent within the purview of our experience. Of course, like the moon exists mind independently. That is not context dependent, let's say, for its existence. But someone says the earth is flat. Yikes. Someone says testimony is used to corroborate what has been physically gathered. Sometimes there's nothing to be physically gathered. Like in the case of someone who's reporting a rape 20 years later, right? And there's nothing to physically be gathered. You use the testimony to explain why it makes sense that X thing happened the way it happened. And maybe, look, and maybe you have just nothing. Maybe you don't even have, schedules or text messages or anything to be gathered in some of these cases of rape being reported years later. Someone says testimony is verifiable to a degree. Not necessarily. Again, we should use the example I just gave of a rape being reported 20 years later. How are you going to verify that testimony? Are you just going to say that it's verified because they said it? Is that what you mean? I don't know. Someone says it isn't evidence. I think it's an equivocation fallacy. We think of evidence in terms of trials, not logic and science. So then, Neil, you would disagree with academia on this, of whether or not testimony is evidence. Someone says it is evidence. I can see people arguing about how people memories are fallible, therefore making it not evidence, but I generally disagree. Okay. Make sure you guys take a second to smash that like button. I'm going to be doing a lot more analysis like this on a more regular schedule. So if you're interested in engaging with stuff like this, please drop a like. It'll make sure you are notified when I go live with the next stream. Someone says it's a hyperbolization, but this can be done with others. Like, I may love Dawkins, but I can poke fun at some of his cliches and cadence and oversimplify him. Okay, I don't know what you're responding to. Let's see. I'm going to go through some more here, but my chat just jumped to the end. Someone says God could never be found guilty in a court of law of having to exist. So, Tim, don't say never. Don't say always. Don't say absolute. Don't use absolute language. It's a failure of fallibility. Certainty is almost certainly unattainable. This can be easily demonstrated logically. So like whenever you say God could never be found guilty, the question is it at least possible or possibly possible or possibly possible that tomorrow this could be done in some way that you just couldn't imagine or any human being couldn't imagine because it's a God and you can't know something as powerful as that. Is that at least possible? You should say yes if you're being honest. One thing about human beings too is fallibility is part of our nature. As much as you might be an atheist today, it's at least possible that you could become a born-again Christian and believe in the infallibility of God and God's existence tomorrow. That's at least possible. So fallibilism is important, folks. Certainty is almost certainly unattainable. Someone says it is evidence regardless of whether it is true, whether or not it is true. Right. Yeah. There's such thing as bad evidence or incorrect evidence, wrongful evidence. Someone says testimony is evidence because it pertains to the case at hand. Yes, whatever the case may be. That is the academic standard. And someone says, and the case at hand is a claim. Cosmic says even science has to accept axioms to even begin the process. Yes, this is true. This is why science starts with the philosophy of science. If you are a science enthusiast, you should be well read on the philosophy of science. Someone says it is evidence. Okay, so it looks like a lot of people are agreeing that it is evidence here. Which is good because we're agreeing with, academic categories of evidence here. So let's go back a little bit and keep going.
Evidence that P is true. So set aside Alex kind of shifting focus to the resurrection. I'll just, as charitably as possible, he picked an example. But I'm talking about epistemology and skepticism such that it doesn't matter what the claim is. The claim itself is not in any way evidence for the claim being true. I'm going to let James continue.
So the claim itself is not evidence in any way for the claim being true. So if Matt Dillahunty was judging a case when he had to weigh the testimony, the claims of someone who came in and said, you know, this defendant raped me repeatedly 20 years ago, but I was feeling, afraid to come forward. And let's say I watched this documentary and it empowered me, and here I am today. I think to speak in too absolute terms here, to be too stringent, and to lose a bit of that fallibilistic posture that Matt Dillahunty started with in this video is we're moving in the wrong direction.
Way. Evidence for the claim being true. I'm going to let James continue.
This is just called testimonial evidence.
Doesn't matter what the claim is.
Okay, we're going to get into testimonial. Okay.
The claim itself is not in any way evidence for the claim being true. I'm going to let James continue.
This is just called testimonial evidence, namely, evidence you get for the truth of a proposition from the fact that someone testified to its truth.
So, testimonial evidence, this objection from James seems to be along the lines of, because anything can be expressed as a claim, therefore you'd never have any evidence. It's kind of the path that he's kind of leaning down here.
Let's see if he's actually going that way.
From the fact that someone testified to its...
Or the claim being true. I'm going to let James continue.
This is just called testimonial evidence, namely, evidence you get for the truth of a proposition from the fact that someone testified to its truth.
So, testimonial evidence, this objection from James seems to be along the lines of, because anything can be expressed as a claim, therefore you'd never have any evidence.
No, I don't think, I'm not sure how Matt inferred that, but I am glad he used the language of seemings here. That's a great fallibilist posture.
It seems to be along the lines of, because anything can be expressed as a claim, therefore you'd never have any evidence. It's kind of the path that he's kind of leaning down here.
I'm not sure he's leaning down that path. I don't see any good evidence that's the case, but we'll see where this goes. Maybe Matt's prediction is right. I would, in this situation, when Matt makes a claim like that, I would want him to then give some specific points as to why he believes this is happening. Related to posture, related to actual words that have been said from Joseph Schmid. I think Matt keeps calling him James, but I could be crazy.
Because he thinks it's just a fact that if somebody makes a claim, that's evidence for the claim. No, you fundamentally misunderstand this, and James is about to betray that with his example.
That is that they told you that it's true. So, for instance, my friend claimed that he bought a new soccer ball. This provides pretty strong evidence that he did, in fact, buy a soccer ball.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. The mere fact that your friend claimed to buy a soccer ball is not evidence, and certainly not strong evidence.
So your claim, this is an interesting example. Your friend claims that they bought a new soccer ball, and then you're like, cool. And then let's say another friend calls you later that day and says, man, I've been really feeling like I want to get out and kick a soccer ball around. And they'd be like, oh, you know what? John just called me and he bought a new soccer ball. And then he's like, well, how do you know that? What's your evidence that he bought a new soccer ball? It's like, well, he told me. So yeah, that is testimonial evidence.
He did, in fact, buy a soccer ball.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. The mere
Go back a second, a little bit more here.
That is that they told you that it's true. So, for instance, my friend claimed that he bought a new soccer ball. This provides pretty strong evidence that he did, in fact, buy a soccer ball.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. The mere fact that your friend claimed to buy a soccer ball is not evidence, and certainly not strong evidence.
I think Matt was right by saying, well, he shouldn't be posturing certainty in the way he uses language. Of course, that I quibble for sure with that use of language as a fallibilist. We shouldn't be having certainty posturing in our use of language or in how we present our information.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. The mere fact that your friend claimed to buy a soccer ball is not evidence, and certainly not strong evidence. What you're doing is the same mistake that I'm trying to point out when I'm teaching people about this. You are taking the wealth of information that exists beyond that claim, and you're using that to determine whether or not that claim is feasible. First of all, it's not nonsense. Your friend walks up to you and says, Fergal, Burgle, Manergal, Burgle. There's no truth value in that. It's nonsense. Cool. So now you're hearing them make a claim. I bought a new soccer ball. That conveys information to you. I just did a video on this like last month about how evidence for a proposition is not merely a fact consistent with, but it is accepted information about reality that strongly points towards one conclusion being likely to be true over another conclusion or over it being false. It's not merely facts consistent with. And so when you say your friend claimed that he got a soccer ball, what you're doing is you're ignoring all of the actual evidence. And that actual evidence are the facts that you understand what a soccer ball is. You understand that soccer balls exist. You accept that soccer balls exist. You accept that people buy them. You accept that they can be purchased. They can be owned. You accept that your friend perhaps likes soccer. Your friend is telling you something without, any hidden subterfuge. You don't have reason to suspect that your friend is lying or delusional. There's nothing about this claim. Often it gets framed as extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but that's not really true. All claims require sufficient evidence, and it's just that some claims are already so consistent with reality that it is utterly reasonable. It would be unreasonable to not accept that the claim is likely true.
So there is a talking past each other happening here. I think a lot of what Matt Dillahunty just laid out there would be agreed to by Alex and Joseph Schmid here. But that doesn't mean that the claim itself is not testimonial evidence. So there may in fact be a category error happening here. But before I claim that, I'll want to hear the rest of the video. But the example again that I used, hey man, I bought a new soccer ball. I'm excited. I'm just kicking around. Cool, man. We'll talk to you later. Another friend calls later and says, oh man, I've been feeling like I want to get out and kick the soccer ball around. Well, that's great because John just bought a soccer ball. It's like, oh, really? How do you know that? What evidence do you have? Oh, you just told me on the phone. And then the other guy's like, oh, okay, sweet. Let's call him up and go meet him to play. There's acceptance of the proposition happening here based on solely the evidence of the claim, the testimony coming from the person who claimed to have bought the soccer ball. But what Matt described with regards to how that reasoning works, Matt's outlining the reasoning, the underlying reasoning, and that is correct. He's pointing definitely in the right direction, providing great examples, but that doesn't mean he should disagree that the claim itself, the testimony itself, is evidence. I think I just gave a pretty clear example as to how this soccer ball claim is the evidence. Now Matt might want to say that, well, the reason why it's accepted as evidence, that the testimony itself is accepted as evidence, is because of all of these different things that come into that. You know what a soccer ball is. You trust your friend. It's not like an unbelievable claim, at least as it's presented to you. So all of these different things are in fact playing into that. But when we come to when the person is asked what evidence do you have to believe this, they're going to give the testimony like they just told me. They're not going to give because I know what a soccer ball is, because of whatever. That's all part of the reason as to why they're accepting the testimony. But the testimony itself is in fact the evidence here. Let me know if you guys agree with that.
The claim is not the evidence. The claim is consistent with the entire body of evidence. Everything you know about your friend, everything you know about soccer balls, everything you know about people's desires and everything, all of that. If your friend came up and told you that he bought a spaceship capable of traveling to other galaxies in an hour, all of a sudden that claim isn't as believable. And it's not because the person speaking didn't change. It's something else that changed that makes that claim less reasonable to believe, right? And what's changed
Correct.
is how that claim relates to the body of information, the body of actual evidence that exists. And so
Yes, that is true. But that still doesn't mean that the testimony itself isn't the thing that is being believed to be and cited as the evidence for warranting belief, the justification.
when I say claims aren't evidence, I don't mean that a claim cannot point to evidence. Everything is
Someone said, favoring claims over applying the scientific method to information yourself is a fast track to conspiracy theory mania. Yes, that's true, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about favoring claims over, applying the scientific method.
Any testimony, any scientific paper is a claim that points to evidence and builds off of the wealth of evidence that we already have. So what's happening here is, I think I called him John earlier. I think it's Joseph Schmid, and I'm sorry for getting the name wrong, but I think Joseph is ignoring all of the thought that goes into evaluating his friend's claim and just intuits.
I think he's not ignoring it. That's at a different level of abstraction. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, we have two levels of abstraction happening here. And one is, the underlying reasons and reasoning as to why one proposition will be accepted and another won't. What's the difference? Why is that different? Completely sound. But Joseph Schmid is talking about the individual interpretation of the proposition and what would be cited as the evidence for warranting belief. Different things, different levels, a different level of abstraction.
This is a reasonable claim, and therefore the claim is evidence. No, you're wrong. The claim is not evidence. And if it were, then why wouldn't every claim be sufficient for you to accept it?
Well, we already sorted out. Someone said that there's a sloppiness happening between testimony and claims, but we already sorted out and agree that all testimony involves claims, but not all claims are testimony, right? And I don't think sorting that out has caused any contradiction in the interpretation or the work here?
It is the body of facts that relate to that claim that are either consistent with and point towards it most likely being true, or don't. Well, let's continue.
Doesn't prove it.
Yeah.
He could be lying.
Agreed. And I wasn't talking about proof. I'm talking about what should count as evidence for a claim. And then there's a separate issue of, is there sufficient evidence for a claim? And so testimonial evidence, if you're willing to accept it, is evidence for a claim. If you find it reasonable and consistent with the facts, it's understandable why somebody would find that reasonable. But this isn't about proof, by the way. And I'm somebody who's always kind of pushed proof to the realm of mathematics, of deductive processes. And with something like science, when you're talking about inductive processes, or perhaps even in some circumstances, abductive reasoning, we're not talking about proof. We're talking about what sort of claims should count as evidence for and not merely claims of.
Yeah, this is a great epistemic posture presented by Matt. Pushing proof to deductive processes, I think is great. I have no quibbling with that.
Well, let's keep going.
Right, or he could have misperceived a soccer ball, and he thought that it was a soccer ball, but it was actually like a cleverly disguised basketball or something. But still, it provides strong evidence that he did in fact buy a soccer ball. Or again, return to Alex's new dildo. He testifies that he bought a new one to add to his mounting collection, and that's a pretty good evidence that he did. And
did he just say dildo? Can you say that on the internet? Well, I'm going to try it. Dildo.
in fact, buy such a thing.
No, it's not. But don't get me wrong. I understand why you feel that way. It's funny that you instead of talking to somebody, you're talking to the person who you guys know has talked about this ad nauseum. You went with your fairly correct understanding of what the meaning was, and then ignored it in order to just say, "Oh no, if my friend says something, that's pretty good evidence that it did." What if you know your friend to be a habitual liar? Is your friend's claim still pretty good evidence that it happened, even for something mundane like a soccer ball?
No, that would mean that would be an evaluation to whether it's good or bad evidence, right? Like if Donald Trump tells you that I just got off the phone with Netanyahu and he told me I have the biggest brain. I have no, that's horrible evidence to warrant belief that Donald Trump was just on the phone. You would need more than that. But if, your best friend who, is a good faith person, is honest and sincere with their intentions, and you trust them, far different. But that's an evaluation of the evidence. It's not demonstrating whether it's evidence or not.
I mean, your friend could be wealthy, but if you know your friend is someone who likes to mess with you or, lie. So it is both the facts that claim points to, and that includes the facts or what you accept as true about your friend's character, about the situation, about whether they're likely to lie. All of that gets to, hey, is this strong evidence for? And then there's the whole separate issue of whether or not it is sufficient evidence to reasonably conclude that X or P is.
Right. That's an important issue to consider as well. Matt has taken a pretty strong stance, a stringent stance of, they're wrong about this and I'm right. I think it's much more wise to try to steelman the position and see and do an exploratory, and maybe Matt will do this, but have an exploratory moment of trying to synthesize where the crossover might be or where the confusion might be between the two positions here. I haven't seen a ton of openness to doing that. There is a lot of good faith, helpful clarification here as to why what they're saying is wrong and why what I'm saying is right, which is fantastic, great posture. But I would like to see a more, now let's open the exploration here and let's try to steel man, let's try to even gold man, Alex and Joseph to a point where I can accept, given a few little quibblings, what it is they're saying, but we must still consider what I'm saying. So there is a mode, maybe a transcending mode, moving outside of the original intent or the original argument here, and looking at it in a bit of a different way. So that's just another posture that could be taken here through this analysis.
Is likely. And if that's all it was, okay, I probably wouldn't have made this video, because he kind of gets it and then he misunderstands.
Well, the way you would steelman it, someone saying, Schmidt's position is weak, though, because it's circular. Well, first of all, show me why you think it's circular. And then also say, how do you steelman that? Well, I think I've been steelmanning it this entire episode. Please correct me if I'm wrong or show me where I haven't done that, but I think that's what I've been doing.
And kind of comes up with a really sloppy argument. And don't get me wrong, it's a little annoying that Alex is basically just sitting there smiling and nodding along, but it's about to get worse, because we are about to completely misrepresent science.
Ooh, exciting. I better fill up my water for this. Yes, I mean, Alex is nodding along because I would say it's likely that he agrees with this position that Joseph Schmid holds, and disagrees with Matt.
And as we do so, Alex is still going to sit there and nod along. Watch.
Right? Yeah. And listen, science crucially hinges on testimonial evidence.
No, it doesn't.
Let's test that. Well, now before I run this through my system and do some reading here, and we'll do a little study. The claim is that let's hear the claim exactly one more time so we get it right.
Evidence. Right? Yeah. And listen, science crucially hinges on testimonial evidence.
No, it doesn't.
So science crucially hinges on testimonial evidence. Well, when we're talking about science as an interdisciplinary force, and the whole process of scientific consensus, there is a lot of testimony baked into the process. But that shouldn't be confused to mean that, what's important with regards to science is from a truth perspective, is the correspondence criteria. So if there is a claim that, this is the mass of a quark, we need to make sure that claim corresponds to reality. So we have to measure the quark, and we have to make sure that measurement is accurate. These are the foundations of what makes science work. It isn't simply, of course, just testimony that is at play. So let's look at some information here. So does science crucially hinge on testimonial evidence? So the short answer is yes. Science depends heavily on testimonial evidence in practice, but not in a way that replaces empirical evidence. It's a layered system where testimony is structurally indispensable, yet epistemically constrained. Now, here's a detailed analysis of what was just said there. So, science is an epistemically social enterprise that relies pervasively on testimonial evidence, but its reliability emerges from institutional mechanisms that discipline, filter, and cross-check that testimony against empirical reality. And again, I'm going to read through all this, but I'm anticipating that we're going to get some of the same talking past each other or misinterpreting taxonomically or the level of abstraction where Alex and Joseph are sitting versus where Matt's interpreting and sitting. So the dependence thesis, so why science needs testimony. No individual scientist can directly verify most scientific knowledge. Examples, you have not personally sequenced genomes, observed distant galaxies firsthand, run practical particle accelerator experiments, replicated thousands of clinical trials, yet you reasonably believe these results. Therefore, most scientific knowledge is accepted via testimony. Example, journal articles, textbooks, expert consensus. This is called epistemic dependence. Science requires division of cognitive labor, of course, specialization, distributed knowledge systems. This has been emphasized in philosophy of science by thinkers like Philip Kitcher and Alvin Goldman. Testimony in scientific practice. Scientific knowledge is transmitted almost entirely through peer-reviewed papers, conference presentations, textbooks, databases, expert reports. All of these are structured forms of testimony. So an example, a published paper says, we found a statistically significant effect. You did not collect the data, run the analysis, inspect the raw measurements. You rely on the author's testimony and also what other authors or scientists have to say about that author's testimony. Why this is not a problem if done properly. Science is not naive trust in testimony. It builds institutional safeguards that transform testimony into something much more reliable. Replication. Independent labs test the same claim, reduces reliance on any one testimonial source. Peer review. Other experts scrutinize methods and reasoning. Transparency in methods. Procedures are described so others can check them. Convergence of evidence. Multiple independent lines support the same conclusion. Mechanistic explanation. Not just it works, but here's how it works. These mechanisms convert raw testimony into disciplined, cross-checked knowledge. Key philosophical insights. Testimony in science is not just someone said something. It is a claim embedded in a network of accountability, reproducibility, and empirical constraint. That's the difference between random claims and scientific testimony. There's a Bayesian framing here from a probabilistic perspective. You update beliefs based on evidence and source reliability. Scientific testimony works because scientists are partially truth-tracking agents. The system penalizes error. Reputation, replication failure, etc. So scientific knowledge is equal to empirical data, institutional reliability, and testimonial transmission. So failure modes, when testimony breaks. Science can fail when testimonial systems degrade. Replication crisis, some findings don't reproduce. Publication bias, positive results overrepresented. Fraud or misconduct, fabricated data. Authority overreach, prestige substitutes for evidence. These are not failures of testimony per se, they are failures of testimonial regulation systems. Strong versus weak view. Weak view, incorrect. Science is just people believing what other people say. The strong view, which is correct, science is a system where testimony is continuously tested against reality through structured methods. So the final position here is yes, science crucially hinges on testimonial evidence in practice, but not blindly, not uncritically, not without empirical grounding. Instead, testimony is the transport layer of knowledge. Empirical methods are the validation layer. One more time. Testimony is the transport layer of knowledge, the superhighway. Empirical methods are the validation layer, where the validity lies. So, a quick summary: science depends on testimony to share knowledge, but depends on evidence to justify it. So it does depend what is being claimed here.
Doesn't.
Testimonial evidence.
No, it doesn't. Joseph has a fundamental misunderstanding of science, of epistemology, and of testimonial evidence. People offer testimony, but it's not the testimony that is the evidence. In the same way, it's not the claim that is the evidence. It is the supporting facts. It is the data and the information that that testimony points to. It's literally identified as an example of logical fallacies. A fallacious appeal to authority comes in two different forms, but the primary one is that to assert that something is true because an authority says it's true.
Right? And listen, science crucially hinges on testimonial evidence.
No, it doesn't.
So it does, but not the empiricism, right? So I feel again that Joseph Smith is talking about science, including science in practice, science as the global category. And when Matt says no, it isn't, I think he's speaking more to the empirical aspect of science, where we would look to for validity, the justification for what's being delivered in the superhighway. So again, two different levels of abstraction, if in fact what I'm interpreting is correct here.
Joseph has a fundamental misunderstanding of science, of epistemology, and of testimonial.
Someone just said someone said, who cares about science, math? Who cares about science? Math is the actual root of philosophy, logic, and reason. Wrong. Math is not the root of philosophy, logic, and reason. Logic is the root of those things. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. If we think of our experience fundamentally for a second, we are looking around and we are noticing and have noticed and have documented what we've noticed, consistent relation of reality. These are logical observations. Consistent relation in reality is what we are logically observing. That is the foundation of those things you just laid out. Logic is at the foundation. Now, you might want to say, oh, well, those logical observations are not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a level of abstraction, above that is born. Well, if we want to talk about what is fundamental, we have to start with the human experience And what we are noticing, and what in academic terms we are going to describe reality like. And my best understanding is that we notice a consistent relation in reality. So apples are falling down from trees, they're not falling up from trees. And in fact, there's not only one single object. There are many different objects that can be handled in not just one, but two separate objects, being our hands. And those are being handled within a subset of 5 digits on each hand. So noticing like a consistent relation in reality, logical observation is fundamental there. If you disagree with that, then I'm interested to know why.
Evidence. People offer testimony, but it's not the testimony that is the evidence. In the same way, it's not the claim that is the evidence. It is the supporting facts. It is the data and the information that testimony points to. It's literally identified as an example of logical fallacies.
Matt's referring to empiricism here. He's not also referencing the important aspect of science that Joseph Schmid was referencing, which is the superhighway testimonial aspect of science. And if you want to say that's not science, that would just be incorrect. Now, does empiricism hinge on that? No, but Schmidt did not say empiricism hinges on that. He said science hinges on that. And I would say that he is correct in that based on what science is here today. Where we are now, science does hinge on, like for all the reasons we just read, right? Science depends on testimony to share knowledge, but depends on evidence to justify it.
A fallacious appeal to authority comes in 2 different forms, but the primary one is that to assert that something is true because an authority says it's true. That's what he's describing. We're just taking...
Communicate, as someone just said, the communication of science is not the same thing as the science itself. That is part of science. Peer review is part of science itself. Yes, it is, Darren. It just is. Someone just said, "Oh, are you certain about the regularity in nature?" No, I'm a fallibilist. Certainty is almost certainly unattainable.
Here, let's go. It's just testimony.
You throw testimonial evidence out the window, we are all screwed, right? Like science relies on saying like, hey, listen, I performed this experiment. Like, here is the picture of the experimental results. I didn't fabricate this, right? I am testifying to you. I am claiming.
So first of all, note the immediate dishonest hyperbolic representation. If you throw testimonial...
He shouldn't call this dishonest. I'll be interested to see if Matt Dillahunty demonstrates what's dishonest about this position. In fact, he might think this position is stupid or wrong, but dishonesty does need to be demonstrated. So I'm interested to see if Matt outlines his justification for that. Let's go back a little bit.
Note the immediate dishonest hyperbolic representation. If you throw testimonial evidence out the window, nobody's suggesting throwing testimonial evidence out the window. This is about whether or not testimonial, anecdotal testimony is consistent with and supported by sufficient evidence that it should be accepted.
Well, it's not that nobody is saying to throw testimonial evidence out the world. I mean, surely there are some people saying that, right, Matt? And Matt's acting as though Schmid is saying that, Matt is saying that, but I don't think Schmid is saying that. Matt is saying to throw testimonial evidence out the window. But in fact, if Schmid is saying that, then Matt is correct to challenge that, but he shouldn't be calling it dishonest, right? It's more likely in scenarios like this than people are like mustache twisting liars just trying to like, scheme and stuff like that. It's much more likely that he's simply wrong by Matt's standards here, or being stupid by Matt's standards.
If you throw testimonial evidence out the window, nobody's suggesting throwing testimonial evidence out the window. This is about whether or not
I don't think SW says breaking the rules of fallibilism again. I don't think you know what fallibilism is. Fallibilism simply is a philosophical principle about remaining open to update, right? Nothing I've said or claimed is not open to update. So you might want to learn what fallibilism is before you say things like that.
testimonial, anecdotal testimony is consistent with and supported by sufficient evidence that it should be accepted. Okay? Having an ancient text where we have no way.
Someone said the believer lied earlier about Matt's behavior. How do you know it was a lie and that it wasn't them just being stupid or wrong? How do you know? How would you demonstrate that?
To verify what this person said, and where we would expect there to be some possible way to verify stuff is fundamentally different. You know, there's a reason why I'm happy to accept the testimony that George Washington was the first president of the United States, but I'm not willing to accept the testimony that he said he would never tell a lie, and maybe he said that, but the anecdote there doesn't tell me what the truth of the story is. But Joseph begins by, if we throw out testimony, you're just screwed. Well, so first of all, nobody's saying that. But he goes on.
Well, Matt hasn't said it. Surely we can find examples of people saying that, I don't care about testimony. I don't give a shit about it. We don't need testimony. I want to know the science. I want to know the facts. In fact, didn't I read out someone's comment along those lines just like a few minutes ago? I think it might have been something along those lines.
To misrepresent science. Watch.
Sure. Of the experimental results. I didn't fabricate this, right? I am testifying to you. I am claiming that this is a real picture that I took of my stuff. I'm testifying to you that I have 67 participants in my study and that I measured these things, right? Science is a big game of testimony.
Part of me wants to really jump in here, but I know that he's got only about a minute or so left of this. And I want to make sure I don't nitpick in order to take a dump on this, because this is one of the most pathetic misrepresentations of science I've seen. So I'm going to take it back again. Just pay attention to what he says and watch Alex. And then I'll talk about it.
I measured these things, right? Science is a big game of testimony. And, of course, there are ways to try to independently corroborate that by having other people produce studies. But again, that's just adding more testimonial evidence to our body, a big body of testimonial evidence. Of course, very systematically and carefully curated testimony and whatnot. I'm not saying that there are no differences between this and the resurrection, but at bottom, this is ultimately just testimony. It's just people saying things, right? It's just claims. They're just claiming that they did these things.
Completely wrong by Joseph Schmid here. At bottom, let's go back.
Between this and the resurrection. But at bottom, this is ultimately just testimony. It's just people saying things, right?
Wrong. At bottom is of science is where the empiricism is. You are wrong, Mr. Joseph Schmid. Now, you might claim, and I'm happy to have this kind of, meta-epistemic conversation with you at some point about this, but you might claim because, these systems are axiomatic and they require commitment at the philosophy of science level, yeah, I'm going to agree with you. But those are value commitments. So if you're using that as a justification to say at bottom these are just claims or whatever, then that would be just dreadfully incorrect. And as presented here, the way you have presented this within the context of this discussion, Joseph Schmid, you are dreadfully incorrect about what is at the bottom of science. If we're going to say what is at the bottom of science, it is correspondence criteria of truth. It is empiricism. And I think that correspondence criteria we could probably say is fundamental to empiricism. But Aristotle would smack you in the face for that one, Joseph.
It's just claims. They're just claiming that they did these things. And we have to have a kind of basic trust in testimony in order to get any of this inquiry up and running. So listen, testimony is evidence. Testimony is claims. Claims are evidence.
Testimony is evidence. Testimony is claims. Claims are evidence, which he's framing in a completely different way than he already acknowledged. That the claim isn't evidence for the claim.
Deal with it.
Testimony is claims. Yeah, deal with it, Matt.
Okay, I will deal with it, Alex. And let me start a completely different way than he already acknowledged. That the claim isn't evidence for the claim.
Deal with it. To get any of this inquiry up and running. So listen, testimony is evidence. Testimony is claims. Claims are evidence.
One more time.
Claiming that they did these things. And we have to have a kind of basic trust in testimony in order to get any of this inquiry up and running. So listen, testimony is evidence. Testimony is claims. Claims are evidence.
He said testimony is claims. So not all claims are testimony. It would be interesting to ask Joseph that straight out.
Have to have a kind of basic trust in testimony in order to get any of this inquiry up and running. So listen, testimony is evidence. Testimony is claims. Claims are evidence.
Not all claims are testimony, though.
Testimony is evidence. Testimony is claims. Claims are evidence, which he's framing in a completely different way than he already acknowledged. That the claim isn't evidence for the claim.
Deal with it.
Testimony is claims. Yeah, deal with it, Matt.
Okay, I will deal with it, Alex. And let me start by pointing out that it's how absolutely sad it is to watch someone just nod along to this sort of misrepresentation of science and unsound epistemology being off.
Again, I don't think it's a misrepresentation of science, except for that last part. That last part was a misrepresentation. The part saying that, all the way to the bottom, it's just testimonies and claims. It's wrong. The facts matter to empiricism and correspondence criteria. It's amazing that Alex didn't call that out, right? He seems to just be kind of horny here on what Joseph Schmid laid out. That last part should have been, whoa, hold on there. I was with you until this, until you said this, but.
So when he says, oh, I'm presenting you with my findings and there are 67 people in the study, you're not just accepting the claim that there were 67 people in the study. We have the data on those individuals, and science is not just at the bottom testimony and more testimony.
But the data, Matt, is often being delivered by testimony, right? The data in one way or another by ways of verification through, through the scientific process, which includes peer review, leading to a scientific consensus. That's part of the testimony that's being claimed here.
Data on those individuals, and science is not just at the bottom testimony and more testimony. It is about testing claims, independent verification and replicating results. It is about peer review. Oh, well, it's all just, no. People might accept bad science, and have many times. But science is not merely, I'm going to testify to this, and somebody else is going to testify, and somebody else is going to testify, and you're just going to have to take it.
So the claim merely was not made. It wasn't the claim that science is merely testimonial throughout the majority of the video. But I'm going to clarify again that piece of it's just testimonial all the way down, that was bullshit. So maybe Matt's including that in the general outline here, but yeah, and if he is, fair enough. But I think it's wise to differentiate between what was said earlier on and that particular mistake. Let's get more specific. Specificity is where wisdom lies, not in generalities, right?
No. The fallacy of an appealed authority is saying that something is true because an authority says it's true. It would be fallacious for us to build our science based on here's what the scientists say. No, it's not the scientists.
Darren said, Pangburn, peer review isn't testimony. Well, part of peer review is. See, this is the problem. So it says peer review isn't testimony. Testimony is needed to communicate it, but the peer review itself isn't testimony. Wrong. The testimony is part of the peer review. You can still fight for the importance of empiricism here without saying like, no, it's only this. This is what it is. It's like, no, of course peer review is also testimony. That's a massive, massive part.
And it's not their claim. It is the data. And if they've made a mistake about the data, that is open to, this is one of the reasons why we have peer review and attempts at replication. If they have results that are anomalous and unable to be reproduced, once again, this is why we have this. And by the way, these are things that you can do. Doesn't mean you have the scientific equipment, doesn't mean you have the resources available to do the study, but in principle, these are independently verifiable, testable, falsifiable claims. To present all of science as if it's just testimony stacked on testimony, and have Alex sit there and
Matt is right here with his ire. This was represented in that way at the very end there.
Smile and nod along and yeah, take that, Matt. Man, this is pretty embarrassing.
Well, in Alex's defense, I think he seemed to be in a pretty like lighthearted, playful posture here. It would be interesting, and maybe I'll send an email to Alex and be like, you should make a video about this because it's quite interesting. And why you didn't speak up? Were you just like, do you actually commit to these ideas that you didn't challenge, or were you just like I don't even know where this clip came from, right? If this is, I assume maybe from Alex's podcast. I don't know. But, do you actually believe this? Are you, because Matt and myself are taking you seriously in not interjecting here. So what do you have to say for yourself? No. But yeah, like, what do you think about Matt's critique here? And also mine, especially at the end when science was represented incorrectly,
This is the same nonsense that is used by the theists when they talk about the problem of induction or the problem of hard solipsism, in an attempt to spin it as, well, you all have faith. Everybody has faith. You just happen to have faith in science. As if the faith or confidence that one has in a scientific process is on the same footing as the faith or confidence one might have in a claim of a resurrection, something Joseph even acknowledged. Oh, I'm not saying science is on a par with the resurrection. Okay. Thank you for the lip service. But what the theist will do is point out that
Matt has maintained a passionate fallibilist, even though I think some of his analysis, there was a couple errors there that we did outline, but he's maintained a fallibilist, lighthearted, patient, inspired, good faith, helpful communication posture throughout this analysis of this video, this critique of him. And I think that's fantastic. This is an example of how you should analyze content, how, and a lot of great thinking on display here.
a lack of certainty seems to put all claims on equal footing, or the fact that confidence cannot be absolute means that we're all just taking somebody's word for it. And they will drill down and eventually do you can't prove that reality is real, or you can't ground reality. So your claim that vaccines don't cause autism is just as good as my claim that vaccines do. And that your claim that the earth isn't flat is just a claim as a claim that it is. Or that a lack of a scientific explanation somehow makes their magical assertion preferred, or at least not any worse. After all, if you're just taking the scientist's word for it, I can just take the Bible's word for it. This is how Philbros work their way towards incidentally, unintentionally, supporting irrational positions as, well, they're not wholly without merit. A PhD in skepticism might suit both of them. As I said, it's pretty sad to watch somebody just not along with this. I know there's like 44 seconds left. I'll see what's left in here real quick.
I think the problem here is it seems to be kind of making a category claim. It's like, look, yeah, they made a claim, but they didn't sort of make evidence. Like, you might want to say, I don't think that for the resurrection, the claims of the disciples are strong enough evidence, right? But like we discussed earlier, they might still be bad evidence. But like, they're evidence. Like, it might be bad evidence, but it's still evidence.
So one of the...
Yeah, Alex is correct in what he just said there.
One of the differences here is something might be evidence, but it might not count as evidence for a claim. For example, this cell phone might be evidence. Real quick.
I think the problem here is it seems to be kind of making a category claim. It's like, look, yeah, they made a claim, but they didn't sort of make evidence. Like, you might want to say, I don't think that for the resurrection, the claims of the disciples are strong enough evidence, right? But like we discussed earlier, they might still be bad evidence. But like, they're evidence. Like, it might be bad evidence, but it's still evidence.
So one of the
So Alex is talking about the difference between bad evidence, good evidence, but it's still evidence, right? We've been talking about this through the entire video.
differences here is something might be evidence, but it might not count as evidence for a claim. For example, this cell phone might be evidence of something, but that doesn't mean that it, in and of itself, this cell phone, is evidence for a particular murder case or whatever else. I don't know if Alex got really hung up on the notion that this is often used about the resurrection, but it's about all of it. And it's not just a dismissal of testimonial evidence. It is the Bible, in particular, if we're going to look at the Bible here, makes a number of different claims. From the very first verse, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is a claim. Where is the evidence for that claim?
Yeah, so far as I can tell, there is no such evidence for that claim. But the question is, as we discussed today, is the testimony itself evidence? So this is that's actually a key distinction between the impasse here. Perhaps the taxonomic error that's been, riddling this entire video is what category are we speaking in? Are we speaking in the category of reason? Are we speaking in the category of, let's say, logic? So I think there's a mixture of categories happening, or mixture of different levels of abstraction happening that's causing confusion, where if these guys were sitting down together and they clarified with each other, perhaps I could imagine Matt agreeing that testimony is evidence in the way that they were describing or trying to talk about evidence, because they would be probably frequently agreeing with Matt's reason clarifications relating to why something is considered valid or sound evidence and why something else isn't.
If the statement is itself evidence for the claim, then the question becomes, okay, what isn't evidence for the claim? And what counts as sufficient evidence for the claim, which is still important. The Bible here makes a number of different claims. From the very first verse, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is a claim. Where is the evidence for that claim? If the statement is itself evidence for the claim, then the question becomes, okay, what isn't evidence for the claim? And what counts as sufficient evidence for the claim, which is...
Well, the problem is there is a sea of bad evidence, right? So if we are to think about this from the perspective of Alex and Joseph here, it would be interesting to see if they agreed that the claim in the Bible that God created the heavens and the earth, would they consider that testimonial evidence? Now, what I want to look at here is, let's see. So yeah, the answer here is it can. So this can function as testimonial evidence. And because it can function as testimonial evidence, what's more accurate for me to say is that this claim can function as testimonial evidence, but it's shit evidence by my standards of good and bad evidence. This would be considered a very weak and highly constrained piece of evidence. So if someone brought that into court, for example, I'm here to demonstrate that God exists. Okay, let's hear your evidence. Okay, first I'm going to say in the Bible it says God created the heavens and the earth. If I'm the judge sitting there, I'm going to say, okay, well, anyone could have just written that down. Do you have any more evidence? I'm going to, like, for sound logical reasons, I'm going to just dismiss that as shit evidence. So I know some religious people do this. They'll say, like, well, this is my evidence. You know how I know God is real? It says so in the Bible. It's like, well, that's shit evidence. If we're talking with regards to like things like proof, and I've had conversations with theologians about this, where I will try to steer the conversation more towards proof. You know, is there any proof for God's existence? Do you consider these claims in the Bible to be proof? And then we'll talk about standards of proof and many theologians will say they don't have proof, but they do have evidences or good amounts of evidence by their standards of evidence that they think are decent enough or good evidence. So, yeah. Someone says hypothesis is a better comparison than evidence, a tentative idea to be evaluated. No, I mean, don't confuse hypothesis and theory with what we're talking about here. But yeah, let's continue. The question is, and the right answer actually is, yes, that is or can be used as evidence. So is evidence by some standards who agree that testimonial evidence is evidence, which I do agree with that.
Evidence for a claim.
The problem here is it seems to be kind of making a category. They might still be bad evidence, still evidence.
This cell phone might be evidence of something, but that doesn't mean that it, in and of itself, this cell phone is evidence for a particular murder case or whatever else. I don't know if Alex got really hung up on the notion that this is often used about the resurrection, but it's about all of it. And it's not just a dismissal of testimonial evidence. It is the Bible, in particular, if we're going to look at the Bible here, makes a number of different claims. From the very first verse, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is a claim. Where is the evidence for that claim?
So evidence for that claim, I'd be interested to see what someone would present evidence for that claim. But the claim itself is a piece of testimonial evidence. If someone presented that as testimonial evidence, I would say, okay, fine. But I have really good reasons to not believe this testimony.
The statement is itself evidence for the claim. Then the question becomes, okay, what isn't evidence for the claim? And what counts as sufficient evidence for the claim, which is still important.
Yes, that is, I mean, sufficient evidence is kind of what is important.
And also, it's this idea, it's like a category thing. It's not just, well, in this instance, I don't think these claims count
Alex is right to bring up taxonomy here, by the way.
as evidence. It's like claims are not evidence. When, like you say, sometimes, at least, like, yeah, they are. They might be bad evidence, they might not be enough evidence, but they're evidence, you know? So
it's interesting that he says sometimes.
Sometimes claims are evidence, which is, so they presented it as claims aren't evidence, when in fact,
That's interesting that Alex said there sometimes claims are evidence. And then what does Joseph Schmid do? Does he agree? Because Joseph Schmid was saying claims are evidence.
at least, like, yeah.
And what counts as sufficient
We might have some sloppy thinking here.
evidence for a claim, which is still important.
And also, it's this idea, it's like a category thing. It's not just, well, in this instance, I don't think these claims count as evidence. It's like claims are not evidence. When, like you say, sometimes, at least.
So, okay, he's responding to Matt's position, I guess, that claims are not evidence. And then Alex is saying, well, sometimes they are, but this person he's been interlocked with this entire time has been saying, you know, claims are evidence.
Like, yeah, they are. They might be bad evidence, they might not be enough evidence, but they're evidence, you know? So
Sometimes
Alex and Joseph seem kind of high on each other's sauce here, too. It's interesting. Very, very highly playful and agreeable with each other.
claims are evidence, which is, so they presented it as claims aren't evidence, when in fact, the actual position, which he correctly sussed out, Joseph did, is that the claim that P is not in and of itself evidence for P. And so they're even noting, sometimes it might be, but it's not the claim. They have both overlooked the thing I explained earlier. It is the fact that this claim is consistent with actual evidence. Like, we have good reason to believe this person is a reliable witness conveying true information. That can...
Someone said, so in your logic, bad evidence is better than no evidence? Are you talking to me? No, I never said that. No one has said that in this entire stream or the video on the screen. Robin says, are claims hypotheses? Some claims can be hypotheses, but no, claims are not hypotheses. Some claims can be.
And make the statement, because of the supporting evidence of honesty and accuracy, this is why we tend to trust historians, depending on, the evidence that we have that they are reliable narrators of history. And so they seem to both be wanting to suggest that this is dismiss all testimony, which it isn't, never was, and in their most charitable construction of it, does not exist. And yet that's the only thing they've deconstructed. Well, congrats, guys. I'm not saying that testimony isn't supported by evidence and that testimony should be thrown out. I'm saying that testimony absent supporting evidence and absent sufficient supporting evidence shouldn't be accepted.
Yeah, Matt's saying it shouldn't be accepted. That's a different claim than it's not evidence, because this was quibbling over what is evidence and what isn't evidence, right? But, I mean, academically, claims are evidence, right? When we look at this in a thorough academic way, claims are evidence. But, for me, in the way I think, if someone's like, God exists. Oh, okay. Why do you believe that? How do you know? Well, what evidence do you have? Here's my evidence. The Bible says so. Then I'm going to be like, well, that's shitty evidence in my opinion, because, anyone could have just wrote that God exists in the Bible, right? I don't see that as a good reason to believe the proposition.
That's that. We can wipe our hands of that particular slogan.
You can wipe your hands of that particular slogan. Well, you can. I don't remember ever suggesting that this was in any way a requirement or an absolute or a truism. It is at most a note that merely claiming something is not in and of itself evidence for the thing being claimed.
Evidence for the thing being claimed. Okay, and that is different than claims are not evidence, right? It's interesting, and we'll get through the rest of the video here. It'll be interesting to see if Matt clarifies that he agrees that testimony is, or claims are evidence, and that what he means to say when he says this, which he kind of just clarified, that he means that claims, and let's go back just to make sure we get it exactly right.
Wipe your hands of that particular slogan. Well, you can. I don't remember ever suggesting that this was in any way a requirement or an absolute or a truism. It is at most a note that merely claiming something is not in and of itself evidence for the thing being claimed.
Evidence for the
and
thing
the plural
being claimed. Yeah, and that is different.
Anecdote isn't data. And it's wild, and I don't know a lot about what's happened over the years, but Alex went after being on AXP, did an interview with me about veganism, and then for clarity, my position on veganism is that it's a moral virtue, but not a moral obligation. And because I wasn't willing to agree that it was a moral obligation, Alex and some of his more zealous acolytes in the vegan community were posting on everything that I did. None of the things I posted had anything to do with veganism, but man, they'd come on all the time. And now I hear, but I haven't talked to him about it, I hear that Alex isn't a vegan anymore. So I don't know if he's just acknowledging that he's immoral or if he's come up with a different view on the moral obligation of it. But I mean, if they didn't reach out to me, but they decided to talk about me, and I don't want to do the dueling videos. And I think I've been clear on this multiple times, and it's just, I don't know, a mix of laziness and dishonesty on their part, because they charitably suggested the correct understanding of what it should mean, and then they argued against the claim as if it were just asserting we should toss out all testimonial evidence or ignore all testimonial evidence, which is not at all what their charitable version or what I meant.
Again, I don't see evidence of dishonesty here. I see evidence of, being wrong, which is completely fine. Dishonesty has to be demonstrated. But as far as like making comments about what Matt has to say without inviting him on, I mean, it's the war of ideas. This is the world we live in. People are going to critique things you have to say, like me doing this critique and analysis today. And I think that's all good, so long as it's being done in a good faith, helpful way. Now, Matt is mentioning dishonesty here. He hasn't demonstrated the dishonesty. He would need to clarify what he means by that. But yeah, if you are sensing bad faith, then you should call that out and demonstrate it and show your justifications as to why you believe that. And But I think the video that Matt reviewed, it seemed like good faith and helpfulness was coming from Alex and Joseph. But there's obviously a kind of a categorical disagreement here, which is a lot of it is like, almost Alex was getting a little bit into when he said like, sometimes claims are evidence, which is a much softer approach to the proposition that claims are evidence. It's like sometimes they are. Claims can sometimes be evidence, but if they are testimony, then by an academic standard, they would be considered evidence, albeit in many occasions weak evidence. But I go back to the example of the testimony of, let's say, a lady in court who is reporting and trying a rape against her that happened, 12, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. And there's just a complete lack of any evidence in the case absent the claim, which would be, I think, in that case, the only evidence up for evaluation. And of course, there would be other things to look at that I would look at as a judge, the credibility of the individual. But let's say in this case, this was someone who was demonstrated to be a credible person. And someone could also say that that's additional evidence. But that wouldn't mean that the claim itself wouldn't be, or the testimony wouldn't also be considered part of the body of evidence.
Was pointing to. And then they want to pretend like I use this as a slogan and hang up on people. Okay, find that clip, fellas. But if you're going to talk about me and not to me, cool. I don't have time for that. Some of us aren't just engaging in Philbro squatting on stuff. Some of us are out in the trenches, actually engaged with both honest and dishonest interlocutors on a regular basis. If Alice...
I think dismissing an implied dismissal of these two for the philosophy bro thing, I don't think is a strong posture. You don't, Matt doesn't need to do that. And you would, this is what I talk about in these, when I'm looking at people's attempts to review political debates and things like that. It's always a mistake, I think, moving from specificity to generality, throwing these two into a large group and speaking in generalities and speaking to a general group as opposed to staying focused on the subjects you are examining. I think that's a mistake. It lacks specificity, and specificity is where I think the wisdom is located in these kinds of analyses.
If Alex wants to talk about whether or not a claim is in fact evidence for itself, I'm down. And if he'd like to have a discussion about why he nods along to blatant misrepresentations of science and basic reliable epistemology, I'm down for that too. But since I haven't heard from him in years, and I was the last one to reach out, and neither of these guys bothered to reach out to me before naming me, misrepresenting me, and some might say attempting to slander me, and maybe trying to shame me while making themselves look ridiculous on science.
I don't think there's slander. I don't think there's shame. I just think it's a disagreement. So I think Matt's taking on more of a heavy-hearted posture now. We want to keep that lightheartedness strong throughout the entire critique so that we remain open. We don't become clouded, closed off, too stringent. That's when there's a higher chance of making mistakes, like falling into generalities, like we just kind of witnessed there.
And epistemology, I'm not particularly optimistic that I'll hear from either of them. See you next time.
Well, overall, I think it was a look at the hat on Matt. That's hilarious. Overall, I think it was a and we will do the Pangburn virtue scorecard on the transcript here. But I think it was a good faith, helpful, fallibilistic, patient, lighthearted in general approach to responding to this critique. So good on Matt for maintaining that posture for the majority of this video. So let's do our analysis. I need my Gmail. Actually, this will be quick because it was actually a short video. I would like to do it here. Thank you all for being here, by the way. Make sure you drop a like. Thank you so much for your comments. I will scan through a few comments before I finish up here. Oops. Don't crash. Someone says, why are we platforming this channel? I just stumbled here drunk. I don't think you're platforming anything, Jessica. We have a massive, wide-reaching platform as it is. It's all good. We just dropped the most viral debate on the internet right now. It's all good. It's not about popularity here. It's not about likes. It's not about, it's about putting good faith, helpful conversations out into the world. And when we have good examples to teach by that go viral, that start reaching a lot of people, that's a very positive thing for my moral quest. And my moral quest is to maximize well-being, physical, mental, and social health for myself and those around me. So no, I wouldn't be under the illusion that you are platforming anyone or anything like that. Okay, let's run this scorecard. More agua. Okay, so let's start with fallibilism for Matt. We will be analyzing this transcript through the system I've built to do Pangburn virtue analysis scorecards. And Matt will be getting judged by the standards of the 6 Pangburn virtues and maxims. So first virtue, fallibilism. Maxim, certainty is almost certainly unattainable. Matt shows a strong commitment to epistemic calibration. He does not frame knowledge as absolute certainty, and he explicitly distinguishes proof from inductive or abductive supporting evidence. At 251 to 313, he refines the slogan, a shorthand claims aren't evidence. Shorthand claims aren't evidence probably isn't accurate, but my intent was always that the claim or a claim is not evidence of the truth of that proposition. So, and at 1013 to 1028, the claim was all claims require sufficient evidence, and it's just that some claims are already so consistent with reality. 1308 to 1329, he pushes proof into mathematics and deductive systems, distinguishing it from scientific reasoning. 2152 to 2211, he emphasizes science as independently verifiable, testable, falsifiable claims. Why he scores high here. Matt is not merely skeptical in a vague way. He is doing what Pangburnian fallibilism requires, calibrating confidence according to the relation between a claim and the broader body of evidence. He rejects simplistic binaries and repeatedly argues that rational belief depends on context, background knowledge, and evidential support. He also avoids a common epistemic failure, treating all uncertainty as equal uncertainty. At 2230 to 2305, he criticizes the flattening move where lack of absolute certainty is used to place science and resurrection claims on the same level. That is a strong anti-dogmatic point. Why it is not higher, why the score is not higher. He is very good at describing fallibilist procedure, but less good at applying fallibilist humility to his opponent's possible intentions. At several points, he moves quickly from they are confused to dishonest, lazy, or slandering. That is not necessarily false, but it is a stronger attribution than the transcript itself fully secures. Bottom line, Matt shows substantive epistemic sophistication and a strong anti-dogmatic orientation. His score is reduced only because his interpretive charity toward opponents is thinner than his evidential charity toward claims. So Matt gets an 8.2 out of 10 for fallibilism, which is a fantastic score. Well-being, maximize well-being for yourself and those around you. Matt is trying to defend truth-tracking norms, which ultimately can serve well-being. Better epistemology generally reduces confusion, gullibility, and manipulation, but in interpersonal terms, the tone here is mixed. So supporting evidence 431 to 450, I don't ever recall trying to shut down thought. 1054 to 1138, he carefully explains why extraordinary seeming claims require broader evidential support. 2032 to 2211, he gives a detailed account of why science depends on data, testing, and replication rather than mere say-so. Negative evidence, 1528 to 1545, really sloppy argument. 1857 and 1906, one of the most pathetic misrepresentations of science I've seen. 2218 to 2226, this is pretty embarrassing. 1944 to 3008, a mix of laziness and dishonesty. 3107 to 3118, making themselves look ridiculous. Analysis. There is some well-being value in directness. Pangburnian well-being is not niceness at all costs. Sometimes sharp correction is appropriate. But the question is whether the response is well-directed toward understanding and flourishing, or whether it slips into ego defense and social punishment. Matt spends much of the video doing real explanatory work that raises his score. But the the interpersonal field becomes harsher as the video progresses. He repeatedly frames the others not just as wrong, but as unserious, embarrassing, dishonest, or status-seeking. That may feel satisfying rhetorically, but it often reduces the chance of reciprocal understanding. So the bottom line here, the content of the response tends to support epistemic well-being. The tone sometimes undermines relational well-being. So Matt gets a score of 6.9 out of 10. That's a B- for well-being in this transcript. Communication. The corresponding maxim, good faith and helpfulness are the minimum requirements for a fruitful dialectic. Matt is quite strong here in terms of conceptual unpacking. He explains the difference between a claim, evidence for the truth of that claim, testimony, background knowledge, sufficiency of evidence, proof versus induction, science versus appeal to authority. That is excellent communicative work. So the supporting evidence at 251 to 313, he clarifies what the slogan was intended to mean. 840 to 1046, he explains that what makes the soccer ball claim believable is not the mere utterance, but the larger evidential context. 1237 to 1329, he distinguishes evidence from proof. 2032 to 2211, he clearly explains scientific norms, data, peer review, replication, falsifiability, independent verification. At 2621 to 2731, he restates his position in a more careful, less sloganized form. His strongest communication move. His best communicative move is probably the soccer ball spaceship contrast at 1054 to 1125. That is exactly the kind of accessible example that helps a listener grasp evidential context without needing formal epistemology vocabulary. The weakness, communication under Pangburn standard, is not just clarity, but is also good faith helpfulness. Matt is helpful in explanation, but sometimes less so in interpersonal framing. So certain passages around 3 minutes and 46 seconds, 15 minutes, 28 seconds, 20 minutes and 9 seconds, 30 minutes and 19 seconds contain passages that are more ridicule than dialectically necessary. So while he communicates his own view well, he does not always create the most fruitful discussion atmosphere. So very strong on clarity, distinction making, and pedagogical example use, moderately weakened by adversarial framing. So his communication score is an 8.4 out of 10. So that is very high, a fantastic score. The Pangburnian score, in order to reach that Pangburnian level, you would reach an 8.5 out of 10. So he's just under the cusp there, which is great. Much higher than most people will ever score. Unfortunately, patience, ultimate patience, even in the face of detestable ideas. This is the weakest area of the performance. Matt does not fully lose control. He remains intelligible and structured, but he shows repeated signs of irritation, mockery, and exasperation that lower the patient's score. Evidence of patience, 1537 to 1551. He says he wants to avoid nitpicking just to, quote, take a dump on this. 2420 to 2427. He notes there are only 44 seconds left and restrains himself a bit. Throughout the video, despite irritation, he continues explaining rather than simply dismissing. Evidence against patience would be 629 to 638. I would hang up on you right now, evidently, in your fictional little world. 1857 to 1906, one of the most pathetic misrepresentations of science I've seen. 2218 to 2226, pretty embarrassing. 2944 to 3008, laziness and dishonesty. 3107 to 3118, making themselves look ridiculous. Pangburnian patience is not passive softness. It is regulated timing under pressure. Matt says coherent. Matt stays coherent, but the emotional pressure is clearly leaking into the rhetoric. He does not merely say, quote, this is wrong. He often says, in effect, this is beneath serious discourse. That offers the patient score, that lowers the patient score because it shifts from patient correction to contempt adjacent commentary. He remains functionally engaged, but not maximally regulated. This is controlled impatience, not fully patient. So he gets a C+, a 6.2 out of 10 for patience for this transcript. Lightheartedness, the maxim, refine and express your sense of humor. Matt shows some humor and conversational looseness, which keeps the video from becoming sterile, but a good portion of the humor is barbed. Supporting evidence 323 to 334, he playfully contrasts the alleged motto with his actual motto. 629 to 638, sarcastic but comedic line about hanging up. 1350 to 1358, he repeats the dildo example with some amused detachment. 2008 to 2009, okay, I'll deal with it, Alex. Quote, why this is middling rather than high. Pangburnian lightheartedness is not just wit, it is the capacity to introduce humor without degrading the resolution of the exchange. Here, the humor often serves as a delivery system for disdain. It is effective rhetorically, but only partially virtuous in the Pangburn sense. So, the bottom line is that he's present, lively, and sometimes useful, but not especially generous. The humor is more combative than playful, clarifying. So for lightheartedness, he gets a 7 out of 10, which is right where you want someone to be, honestly, when analyzing things like this. 7 out of 10 is a fantastic score. Inspiration score. Now, in Pangburnian inspiration, the maxim is let art and science inspire. This is measuring how inspired by art and science the individual appears to be, whether we're analyzing them in general, but in this case, we're analyzing this transcript. So by your, Matt scores very high here because the whole backbone of the response is organized around scientific and epistemic seriousness. He is visibly motivated by standards of inquiry, verification, falsifiability, replication, and disciplined reasoning. Supporting evidence, 915 to 933, he gives a fairly precise evidential account of what should count as evidence. 1308 to 1329, he distinguishes deductive proof from inductive scientific reasoning. 1605 to 1627, he explicitly centers science as testing claims through data, peer review, replication, falsifiability, and independent verification. 2230 to 2357, he defends the epistemic superiority of scientific process over magical assertion. This is easily his strongest virtue in the clip. He is clearly animated by the structure of rational inquiry itself. He cares about what science is, how evidence works, and why not all uncertainty collapses into equivalence. This is very high inspiration by science. No real signs of art inspiration appear in the transcript, but the science side is strong enough to justify a high score. Matt comes across here as deeply inspired by scientific and epistemological rigor. So Matt gets a massive 9.3 out of 10. That's a huge score in an analysis video like this. So the forensic strengths versus weaknesses. Strongest traits in this clip: excellent evidential distinction making, strong science-oriented epistemic framework, clear resistance to flattening all claims into equal status, good use of examples to explain abstract concepts. The weakest trait would be low interpersonal softness when feeling misrepresented, frequent drift from critique of ideas into critique of people, moderate contempt leakage, reduced patience under adversarial framing. So the overall score is a 7.7 out of 10, which is a great overall score when responding to a critique of yourself, and that's a B+. So the final verdict is that Matt Dillahunty comes off here as epistemically serious, scientifically motivated, and conceptually strong, but also thin-skinned toward perceived misrepresentation and somewhat punitive in tone. In Pangburn terms, this is a performance with high evidential intelligence and lower emotional spaciousness. He wins most of the substantive epistemology in this transcript. He does not win the full virtue field. Okay, and that is the analysis, the Pangburn Virtue Scorecard analysis of Matt Dillahunty's transcript here. Well, fantastic. Let's see. I'm just going through you guys' chat quickly. Looks like you guys are kind of chatting amongst yourselves there. Dal Tzu says, I should have known you'd jump on their disagreement. Oh, yeah. I couldn't help it. And many people wouldn't let me not do it because they were spamming my DMs and a few emails as well. So very good. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Make sure you smash the like button on this video. I hope Alex and Matt Dillahunty or Joseph as well get together and have a conversation about this. I think it would be great. These guys should be talking with each other, critiquing each other. That's the way the war of ideas should play out. Good faith, helpful, open communication between different parties like this. Well, thank you so much for being here. Make sure you guys join us on Discord. That's where I'm hanging out during my regular day-to-day studying with other philosophers and hanging out with people. So please join our the Pangburn Community Discord server. Also on Discord, if you drop me someone who you want me to run a Pangburn Virtue scorecard for, I will drop the scorecards there for you. Just make sure you tag me on Discord. Someone who scores very high, for example, in general, is Carl Sagan. Neil deGrasse Tyson scores very high. Who else? The Buddha scores very high in general. Bertrand Russell. There's been some really, really cool. Who has scored the lowest? Well, Voldemort scored one of the lowest scores I've ever seen. That was an interesting scorecard to run. Obviously, Hitler, Joseph Goebbels, these kinds of people score insanely low by the standards of the Pangburn Virtues. And so anyways, join us on Discord if you haven't yet. Make sure you tag me and I will run some virtue scorecards for you. But until next time, thank you so much for being with me. Make sure you're out there maximizing well-being for yourself and those around you. That means actively trying to maximize physical, mental, and social health for yourself and those around you. And test the limits of that circle of those around you. Try and stretch it out further than you ever have. Work on that. There's a lot of great works to be made and created by engaging in this kind of moral quest. And as always, let art and science inspire. Thank you all so much.